Thank you. It's no secret that most Americans have become increasingly cynical about our current political climate. No matter what your political opinions are, I think we can all agree that it's easy to be disappointed with our democracy. Today, imbalanced districts, powerful lobbies, and the financial impact of special interest groups has eclipsed the collective voice of voters. How can we have a collective voice when we have a political climate that's so tense and divided, it's tearing apart not only friendships, but entire families? Beyond that, we have a political system that seems so far removed from its intended purpose of serving the public interest that most people have lost all faith in government. According to a recent poll, the greatest American fear is currently the corruption of public officials. Politics as power, politics as special interest, politics as deceit. But before we give up on our democracy altogether, let's consider this. The framers of the US Constitution had to negotiate conflicting political ideologies to design a system that reflected compromise and deliberation, a system that was supposed to withstand corruption. That may seem impossible today, but that is in fact where we began. I know this because I spent a lot of time reflecting on democratic principles as a scholar of the Constitution. As a professor of legal studies at Quinnipiac University, I often teach classes in constitutional law. And for me, this political climate seems almost surreal. After all, our Constitution envisions a balance of power, standing laws that are accessible to the public, a system of representation that enables people to have a voice in their government, and most importantly, government that works within the framework of the public good. My teaching and research have pushed me to reflect more on why our current climate has strayed so far from the political vision that has defined our constitutional imagination. More importantly, how do we go about establishing a more meaningful democracy? While there are many components to addressing the very complex problems we really do face today as a democracy, I'm only going to talk about one. And that's the underlying political ethic that enables our constitutional principles to have any meaning. And that's the ethic of civic responsibility, one that presumes that individuals are actively engaged in the political process and that they understand how to balance their own individual interests with the common good. A politics that includes individuals, communities, and local organizations working collectively with elected officials to ascertain the best interests of the community. Politics as collaboration, politics as collective action, politics as trust. How can we revitalize this ethic in our current and contentious political climate? Perhaps we begin by thinking about democracy as more than a form of government. For the great American philosopher, John Dewey, who established some of our most robust civic organizations, like the ACLU and the NAACP. Democracy is an experience of shared living. It requires participation by all members of the community. Participatory practice. After all, everyone affected by social and political institutions should have some say in how those institutions create and implement rules. And when we think of democracy as a practice, the real question we're left to answer is how do we work collectively to understand the needs of the community? Now, it's important to note that collective action does not require consensus. Different experiences shape who we are and how we understand the world. But those experiences need to be explored through dialogue and understanding. We need to engage our neighbors in conversation, even when we disagree. And we ourselves need to be willing to consider perspectives that take us beyond our own experiences. Of course, we're not having genuine conversations in our broader communities anymore. I don't think this was due to any single political event. It happened gradually. We've all been wed to our own favorite TV news channel, our own memes on Twitter and Instagram, our own Facebook feeds. We're living in increasingly segregated communities, and in the process, we may be limiting our own ability to engage with alternative perspectives and to learn from experiences we just don't share. We're beginning to see the role of government and politics in incommensurable ways. If we can't even agree on the same set of facts, how is collective decision-making possible? This is where my work as an educator provided a useful window to a better political future. If we think of classrooms and education as a means of experimenting in problem solving, a process of learning that focuses on building our own capacity to engage with the issues we're studying outside of the classroom, then classrooms become transformative laboratories. In my class in constitutional law, we were able to explore the conditions required for the practice of democracy, beginning with deliberation through dissent. In every class, we discussed a range of controversial issues, from executive orders to the death penalty. And in every class, there was disagreement. Students took opposing viewpoints. Sometimes tensions were quite high. But we nevertheless were able to produce an often imperfect solution that required some compromise. And in this process of discussion and debate, I realized that in my class, we could have contentious conversations. It turns out that when you put people with different viewpoints in the same room with a common set of facts to discuss, exchange, and collaborate, compromise is possible. And I felt hope for the system. If only we could embody a politics of the public good, one centered on deliberation, in which running for office meant representing communities as a whole, not narrow specialized interests. A politics of listening to the needs of the community and responding to them. So that's exactly what I did. I ran a grassroots campaign for Connecticut State Representative, and it allowed me to engage with people who held different viewpoints. More importantly, it allowed me to build bridges with people in my own community. My campaign focused on long conversations, not sound bites, public dialogue, often in a coffee shop, and local engagement. This may not be the easiest or the most practical solution to our contemporary political problems, but for me, it is the most meaningful. While we came close, but we didn't win, what we were able to accomplish in some ways goes beyond the dichotomy of winning or losing. We were able to engage not only others, but ourselves in the democratic process. My campaign team consisted of my husband and a few members of my local town, many of whom I'd only met once or twice before the campaign. Now, they're an extension of my own family. We often attend other organized events together, and now I turn to them for lots of other things, including advice for things like this, public talk. We became a real community. We were also able to mobilize others to care about the political process by thinking beyond the question of who should be elected in each election cycle. Our conversations didn't end with short-term policy issues, but centered on long-term strategies for good government, like campaign finance, ethics reform, and fair voting districts. We spent a lot of time trying to encourage people to come out to vote, especially in underrepresented communities. It was important for me to meet people in my community in person by knocking on their doors and having long and nuanced conversations. prevailing campaign strategies will tell you to spend no more than a few minutes at each door for efficiency. Well, my average time was closer to half an hour. My campaign team would often joke, and sometimes grimace, that I would spend just as much time with someone who was quite unlikely to vote for me as I would with the most enthusiastic supporter. But I felt that it was important to engage my entire community and embody a politics of the public good. From the 96-year-old great-grandmother of 10 to the 18-year-old first-time voter, people knew that something had to change if we were going to save our democracy. And this was true across political parties. Running for office reaffirmed my belief that genuine face-to-face interactions can get us beyond narrow political divisions. I will always remember the woman who never voted, but who came to the polls with her daughters, not only to vote, but to introduce them to the political process. The volunteer for my campaign, who knocked on more than 7,000 doors, despite not having been involved in politics before. The man who never voted, seemed completely uninterested in engaging in politics, but who listened to me at the door, and who came to have coffee with me the following week. I remember the families who weren't so much interested in engaging in politics, but whose own stories of personal hardship informed my own approach to statewide issues. As a mother of 2 young daughters and a child of immigrants, I ran for public office to revitalize the participatory practice that is at the heart of our representative democracy. I want my daughters to live in a society that acknowledges different experiences, but that can work collectively to establish a collective voice for governing. More importantly, as someone immersed in our constitutional past and present, I couldn't continue to simply teach these principles in the classroom without also engaging the public. The fact that so many people were willing to have long conversations with me on these wide-ranging topics signaled a broad consensus that our current climate is failing the vast majority of Americans. I felt a responsibility to engage in the political process to try to change that and to embody a new kind of politics. While I enjoyed the process tremendously, it was not easy. Knocking on thousands of doors meant time away from my family. Many people had no idea how to pronounce my name, whether it was a first name or a last name. I walked up many long driveways, sometimes to find the house vacant. I even got bitten by a dog, a really big dog. Someone else got mauled by a chicken. But in the end, it was all worth it because democracy requires practice. Our democracy doesn't have meaning without a culture of political engagement and a commitment to the public good. Participatory action and collective deliberation are the cornerstones of our constitutional history, and they are the key to our constitutional future. We must begin with the premise that we are the keys to democracy. While there's no single remedy here, let me leave you with this call to action. How can you participate in the public culture of your own community to make it more robust? Can you volunteer with a local organization? Can you engage in advocacy work? Can you participate in a public forum? Or better yet, try to organize one? All of these activities share one thing in common, and that's active engagement that requires us to go beyond our everyday schedules and routines. Collectively, we can restore power in the hands of the community to work together with representatives we trust, who will remember that they serve the public and not simply narrow specialized interests. It's time for us to return to a politics of the public good. Thank you.